Okay, so this is the pilot episode of Bandcamp Massacre, and with me is my co-host Paul Bingham,
Greetings, Ben.
and our guest today is Zakary McGaha.
So,
Okay, so before we get into our Bandcamp choices for this week, Zach, you have a new book out, Indie Rock Cabin. Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, it's been out, I want to say maybe 2 weeks now. And it's probably, as of now, my favorite novel of mine that I've had put out there, which I think in total I've had 7 or 8. There are only 2 that are in print right now. And Indie Rock Cabin's obviously the newest one. It's more of I guess you'd call it kind of like a literary type thing, whereas some of my other stuff in the past was pretty much like straight horror, different genre type things. This one's just plain like a literary novel, but then also coming out in 2 weeks. I'm not exactly sure yet who the publisher will be because there's all kinds of confusion, but Dinosaurs and Potted Plants will be out in 2 weeks, which it's kind of a literary type thing in the same vein as Indie Rock Cabin. But I actually wrote it before Indie Rock Cabin. It's just all the publisher confusion has been keeping it from coming out.
Yeah, I've actually read Dinosaurs and Potted Plants, and there are horror elements to that, but I wouldn't really classify it as horror. It's definitely mostly a character study of these, disaffected college kids.
Yeah, that's kind of what Indie Rock Cabin is too, in a way, except it only deals with one kid. It's more of a kind of a single character study that deals with like not necessarily insanity, but like I guess you would say demonic manipulation. But it's definitely not horror, even though that sounds like horror. It's definitely not, and it's definitely it's from a Christian angle too. But
Okay, and you said you had other books out of print. I'm aware of the story, but for those who aren't, can you tell the audience a little bit about why a lot of your work has gone out of print?
uh, the ones that I had published like really early on went out of print because they came out when I was in high school, and just looking back at it, I wasn't ready to like be published then. And I'm really not that I'm not proud of it, but that work was definitely like flawed teenager stuff. So I purposefully had it taken out of print. But then the stuff that came later, the horror novels from Kensington Gore Publishing, that whole publisher pretty much went under because of some kind of sort of really out of the blue Amazon censorship thing where they had a 3-year-old book that someone found offensive, like in current day. And because of that, Amazon deleted like all of their books off of the Kindle Direct publishing platform, which is what they had been using to print. And yeah, so those books are just gone forever. I could bring them back, but I'm not going to, just because like religious reasons. Whereas I wrote them like pre-Christian conversion, and they're like super gory and depraved. So I don't really feel like having those out there now.
Yeah, so as of right now, the only books you have in print are Indie Rock Cabin and Soothing the Savage Swamp Beast.
Yeah, but then in 2 weeks, Dinosaurs and Potted Plants.
Okay. So again, before we get into the Bandcamp choices, Paul, tell us a little bit about your stuff for the audience.
Well, for the normies, my name is Paul Bingham. I often go by Dr. Brack or Brack, which is my middle name. I am the author of several books, including Down Where the Devil Don't Go, and more recently, what is that other book called, Ben? It's slipped my mind.
the one you wrote with
The split single.
Yeah, Emerald Cressel. I want to. Black House Rock is what that's called.
Black House Rock, yeah, and I also have a play out on YouTube called The Poet and the Cat, which you can watch for free, and it's with Robert Stark, and it's entertaining, a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. But in any case, I'm very interested in writing, literature, and podcasting. I'm honored to join you guys tonight in this podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. For those that don't know, my name's Ben Arzate. I'm also an author. This isn't a literary podcast, even though we are all authors. I have how many books do I have out? Well, I have 4 full-length books and one poetry chapbook out. My newest book is a poetry book called Dr. Sodom and Mrs. Gomorrah, which is out on Amazon now. That was one that I chose to self-publish rather than go through another publisher because it's really hard to shop around poetry, and it's probably one of the most probably I'd say experimental books that I've done so far. So I figured it'd be better to just put it out myself.
Ben, I have a question on that book title.
Yeah.
Jonathan Bowden wrote a book called Colonel Sodom Goes to Gomorrah. Were you aware of that, or is there any connection between the two? He wrote an experimental, I don't know, it's not work of fiction, but just kind of one of his experimental works, stream of consciousness.
I actually was aware of that book. I didn't really make the connection to it until later.
Yeah.
But I was the title, Dr. Simon, Mrs. Gomorrah, both the title kind of just popped in my head one day, and it was one of those things that just kind of kept in my mind. And then one day while I was riding my bike home, the whole poem around it kind of came to me. So that's kind of where it came from. But I do think that on some level that title, Colonel Sodom Goes to Gomorrah, was probably like a subconscious
something very
inspiration.
Meta.
Yeah,
something very meta. But I thought it was intriguing, and it's an awesome title that you've come up with. Is
that about the same John Bowden that wrote that book, the philosophy book you sent me, Ben, the Mad?
Yeah, he's written a ton of books. Most of them were out of print, and he also it's there's an interesting sort of gap between the stuff like that, which are these sort of ranty philosophical tracks, versus his later fictions. I've only read a little bit of Colonel Sodom Goes to Gomorrah, but it's a very it's very modernist, even in comparison to Mad. It's almost very surreal.
Mm-hmm.
Bowden was definitely an interesting figure.
Yeah, if I recommend all of Bowden's over, as it were, especially Sade, which is quite a good work, and there's quite a few others. But if you're interested in horror and that kind of thing, Bowden had a profound interest in horror. So, like I said, a lot of his modernist works dealing with Lovecraft and other stuff are really interesting, and stream of consciousness too.
Yeah, he actually had a lot of really interesting book titles, stuff like Spiders Are Not Insects, Lilith Before Eve, Apocalypse TV, things like that.
Yeah, I own quite a few of them. But not to interrupt your original route in this show, I guess we're going to talk about the Indie Rock Cabin.
Yeah, before we get into the Bandcamp stuff, we're going to talk a bit about Zach's new book, Indie Rock Cabin, which I haven't gotten a chance to read yet.
I've just ordered it.
Yeah, so I guess if you were to if we weren't already literally sold on it, how would you pitch it to us, Zach?
I would pitch it to you by saying it's about a teenager who's on the cusp of going to college and moving away from his hometown, but he's had his kind of emotional life wrecked all of a sudden by a breakup from the girl he had dated pretty much throughout his high school career, and he's really down and out about it. And his family goes on a vacation to a campground, and while he's just kind of hanging out there, being somewhat melancholy but somewhat hopeful about the future, he notices up on a nearby mountain there's like a cabin that he just can't keep his eyes off, and there's something about it. And he gets the kind of like intrinsic, almost psychic notion that his ex-girlfriend is staying in the cabin. And from there, the weirdness kind of starts. He meets a bunch of new friends who are into kind of like a almost magical realism type of sort of underground way of making money that is similar to moonshining but not moonshining. And they ride around on this hovercraft that can basically go anywhere and go as fast or high as it needs to, but it doesn't make a sound. And so these people kind of like exist off the grid. So they're basically like hillbillies, but they're able to be productive hillbillies, ironically, by having this type of technology that is probably even better than like what all governments in the world have. And that's really as much as I can get into the plot. It's very, I guess I would say, I wouldn't say stream of conscious-y, but it's very character driven, and it's definitely about this kind of like unraveling insanity that's foisted upon the main character. He's never really to blame. There's always something goading him to it. But I guess where it relates to the Bandcamp thing is I've got like, I was actually inspired by you to do it, but I'd been doing it anyway. I made a soundtrack for the book, most of which was off Bandcamp, and literally the majority of the songs on it were all off, or just things that like I listened to while writing. So it's not like I went and pick songs that I thought would go with the book or anything like that. It's just what I was listening to while I was writing it. So it was, I wouldn't say that was as fun experience as writing the book, but the two are kind of inseparable. I really can't like look at that book and like not think about the songs that sort of put me in that emotional mindset to write it.
So this is a very interesting question regarding the music, because I've often found that when I was doing my book, I had a soundtrack to it, but I never thought of doing Ben's idea of this, making an actual soundtrack or, considering it. I just thought, boy, this music helps me write, what I'm working on, and gives me a certain level of inspiration. So how do you feel it primarily impacted your work?
It's very hard to say, because I wouldn't say that the music gives me ideas, but it helps to kind of zone out and get in this kind of immediately emotional area. Like, for instance, I listen when I'm writing to a lot of pop music. Not that pop is really where my music taste lies, but I find that emotional immediacy that's very accessible puts me right into the mode to just kind of crank out words and outlines and whatnot. Whereas if I was listening to something a little more out there, like Bill Laswell, which is another musician I'm super into, I wouldn't really be able to get into the mood as much. Like, I've done it and I've written to weird music that isn't really doesn't have like a ton of like I guess I'll say poppy emotions in it. But I found that listening to stuff like that, it really just helps put you in that mindset to get stuff out and enter a world. Because I mean, when you're writing, you kind of enter that little world or fictional world that's just, you're knowing it purely through like the emotions of the characters and how they relate to the environment. So I think having something that kind of soothes you but heightens your emotions at the same time helps.
I understand, because sometimes when writing dialogue, you get, my experience is that you get really into it and you're actually sharing or experiencing the motives sometimes of or emotions, not motives, but the emotions of sometimes of the character, sometimes of the prospective reader that might be reading it down the road, but you're having those emotions, and sometimes you can't. It's all you can do just to stay seated in front of your desk and continue writing, because the emotions, the words that are coming out, the sentences, the arguments that you're creating, or whatever you're creating in terms of dialogue, are actually moving you to physical emotion, as well as it's not just in your head, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely had that experience with this novel. It's definitely really like a melancholy type thing. So a lot of the music that was on the soundtrack has that bent to it. But yeah, I think it's very helpful doing that. I used to not write the music, but nowadays I really can't envision myself not writing to music. Like even things like outlining or just thinking about the book, because I do that too. Like I think I've gotten a lot of my best ideas just driving around with some CDs in, and I've not. I would say that's probably guided my writing more than anything, of just driving around and listening to things and coming up with little music videos in my head.
So, with regard to the music, just one more question, and I'll let you jump in, Ben. I remember Tom Wolfe wrote a book in reaction to the dying novel, or the dying of the novel, and it was called Ambush at Fort Bragg. And the point of the book was that it was just only available in audiobooks, and it had a soundtrack. So as the narrator read, various music played it in the background as the narrator read, and it generally had something in connection with the story. So if, for example, they're in a bar that's playing a certain type of music that Wolfe describes, that type of music, it won't be any particular song, but it might be some generic music would play in cohesion with the narrator, or with the narration, rather. So have you thought of something in that nature for an audiobook for your work?
I actually have thought about that type of thing. And even back, when you're in high school and you get around with like other creative people and you're like, yeah, we're going to do some kind of freaking collaboration or something. I remember there's this one rapper kid who used to be my friend, and we always had an idea of doing something like that, which of course we actually never did anything. But it would kind of be difficult for me because I don't really listen to music when I read. I know Ben does. I've never been able to do it. The only thing I can listen to when I read is like ambient stuff or collections of rainforest sounds. I know that sounds weird, but it's like kind of my go-to. I have a whole like a collection of rainforest sounds that I listen to. Like but that's not to listen to it. It's just to tune out like people talking if you're in like an apartment or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, I thought down the road, in terms of overall the situation being what it is, with people being more inclined to listen than to read, the possibility of releasing an audiobook in cohesion with some original music might be a good idea.
That is a very awesome idea.
Yeah, I was hoping like in sometime in the future to do something kind of like a radio play for podcasts, which surprisingly there don't seem to be many. Maybe I'm wrong, but there don't seem to be many popular podcasts that are like that. Like the only one I can think of is Welcome to Night Vale.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Ben?
Like there don't seem to be many podcasts that are just fiction, either just reading fiction or just like a radio plays.
Yeah.
But Welcome to Night Vale is the only one I can think of. It's a sort of horror-ish podcast where it's basically like I've only listened to like one or two episodes, but it's transmissions from a haunted town with a bunch of weird stuff. Like the narrator is described as not short, not tall, not fat, not skinny. He basically like looks like no one, and there's a lot of characters that they're like characters you could read about or describe, but you could never see visually. One character is like the man whose smile is no, that is not a smile. That's how he's described every time.
Yeah, that's very That's very interesting. That whole concept, and maybe we could consider doing something of that nature with this podcast. At least part of it, maybe making a portion of it, in which we, instead of just discussing a book as we are, we each might take a chunk of it and read a chunk of it. The three of us, and actively discuss it after performing it.
That's a possibility, and like I said, I'd kind of want to do like them as like sort of standalone plays. I know you've written a few plays, Paul. I don't know if you have any that would work in like purely audio format or anything like that.
That would be my preferred deal to write if I were going to start writing again, because I wrote The Poet and the Cat in like 10 minutes from an idea I had in my head, and that would be, to me, that would be an ideal medium for writing, so.
Okay. So to go back to Indie Rock Cabin, was the reason you chose that title is because you were listening to that, or is indie rock like a major part of the book?
Music is a major part of the book, but not indie rock. The main character is cited as liking indie rock, but indie rock's never really a theme. Honestly, the title is kind of like just like what I think of when I think of the book, and it might be because I listened to a lot of indie rock when I wrote it, which I don't really know if you would like. I'm not like some kind of like indie rock nerd, so I don't know like what constitutes indie rock versus, one of the other millions of weird subgenres that you see on the internet these days for kind of out there non-conformist rock. But no, the title is kind of just what I think of when I think of the book. Can't really do. It doesn't really have a rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah, because I think I mentioned this before on the other podcast we're on together, but both the title and a little bit the cover that you made for it does remind me a little of the cover for American Football's self-titled album, which famously is basically just a picture of a house. Yeah,
when I did the cover, that's exactly what I was going for. And I would say that, even though indie rock isn't discussed in it, it's an indie rock book, if that makes sense. Like, it's not a, I can say the feel of the book is the same feel that an indie rock song or album would give you. Kind of the tone of it, I guess, is a better word.
Yeah, quirky and melancholy. The way you describe it, it almost sounds, the plot almost sounds sort of Browdigan-esque, which is, Browdigan, he was writing back in the 60s, which was before indie rock, but a lot of indie rock takes a heavy inspiration from 60s rock.
Yeah, the thing about indie rock that kind of confuses me is that, and I mean, I'm not saying it as a criticism, I love this type of stuff, is that I can't see it as not being distanced from the medium it's in, as in medium being kind of getting like an internet buzz, because it seems like it's like a continuation of like, you have hair metal, and then you have grunge, and then you have a music that's kind of like in between happy and sad. And it's like, I don't know, it has the same appeal to me that writers like Joe Lansdale have, like when they come out of like the, straight horror paperback boom, but doing something kind of weird just because they can. And then when the internet blows up, they kind of become like a genre unto themselves, which that's probably not what indie rock is, but just in my mind, like when I think of it, it kind of fills that gap.
Yeah, when indie rock was kind of around when it was kind of in its nascent stages, it was called college rock, really, because it was famous for being played on college radio stations, which was probably the primary distribution of it before the internet came around, and then it kind of blew up when the internet came around. And It actually was actually a while where it went mainstream, where you had stuff like the Lumineers and so, people wouldn't call them indie now, but Imagine Dragons' early work was a lot more indie sounding, things like that, of Monsters and Men.
The Kings of Leon.
Yeah, they were kind of in that vein too.
Judah and the Lion, which I've never listened to them, I just know of them.
Yeah, Mumford and Sons, things like that. There was a period where they kind of went mainstream. Portugal the Man, which was an indie rock band, they ended up eventually having a hit. What was it?
The
21
Temper
Pilots.
Trap, maybe.
Yeah, and then 21 Pilots is another one. So in a sense, indie, of course, used to refer to independent, but nowadays it refers more to the vibe of the music. Since you hear indie rock in commercials now.
Yeah, but it's like, I guess what I was trying to get to, it's like the indie, like just having that in the title and it meaning independent, just kind of right off the bat makes you think of like a quirky, weird thing that got distribution on the internet.
Yeah, and speaking of distribution on the internet, I think we should get into our Bandcamp choices. Zach, what are some discoveries on Bandcamp that you'd like to share?
I'm currently making a soundtrack, like for the book I'm writing now, so it's like a work in progress, and I just find things that kind of get me in the mood for like the feel that I'm going for. There is a band called Skull Crusher that I've been listening to a lot lately, particularly their song Places/Plans. I'm forgetting what album that was off because I just wrote down the song title, and I've listened to that song quite a few times on replay just when riding. But I've also been listening to some more experimental things that are kind of like, the more ambient slant. Yeah, there's this band called Emeralds, and they have a song called Lawn of Mirrors. They're a little older, but their stuff, or this album specifically that Lawn of Mirrors is on, was uploaded to Bandcamp. And it's kind of cool reading through the reviews on there of people talking about, seeing them back in the day before the internet and stuff. And they were doing this kind of awesome ambient stuff. And now all of a sudden their, work is back out there via Bandcamp, which is pretty awesome. Good to discover things like that. Who else? I've also been listening to a lot of Animal Collective. I know they're, not new by any sense, but I just discovered them. And I've been going through a lot of their albums, and I would say they're probably the majority of where my music interest lies in right now. I've not picked any of their songs for the soundtrack yet, except for Rain in Cups, which is more of a zone out type song. But yeah, Animal Collective is awesome. You said you listened to them quite a bit, didn't you?
Yeah, I really enjoy that album. What's it called? Let me look it up real quick. It's the album that My Girls is on, which is like their most famous one. Oh yeah, Merriweather Post Pavilion. That's a really good album.
I guess the one thing I would say listen to the most is definitely that Skull Crusher. They're freaking awesome.
And what's their Bandcamp URL? It's skullcrusher.bandcamp.com.
I don't know. It's Skull Crusher, one word. That might help you find it.
Skullcrusher.bandcamp.com. Because when I pull it up, it pulls up a band from New York that has one demo song on it. Something called Ice Age Demo 2011. I'm guessing it's a different one.
Yeah, look up the song Places/Plans. That's the name of it. That should bring you to them.
Oh yeah, here they are.
Yeah, the cover for that album is freaking awesome, by the way.
Okay, it's skullcrusher.bandcamp.com.
Oh. Well, I missed it.
This definitely looks pretty interesting. They call themselves Skull Crusher, and they've got this blonde waifish girl with a Halloween axe.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, I'll have to check those out. And I'll try to find all these and put them in the um, put them in the show description. Paul, do you have any Bandcamp picks for us?
I honestly don't. I don't have the opportunity to listen to music much anymore since I don't have the opportunity to write hardly at all.
That's understandable. So hopefully this will, when you do get the time to listen to music, this will, help you discover some new things. One that I wanted to talk about is a project. It's a vaporwave project. It's the actual name of the project is a Chinese character, and the actual Bandcamp URL is to be depressed, to be in low spirits, which I guess is like the literal is like the translation of it. It's it takes the the vaporwave interest in abandoned malls and sort of makes its own project in itself. The all of the song titles are in Chinese characters, but there are translations of the Chinese characters in the descriptions of the album, and all of the album covers, quote unquote, are these very fuzzy, very somewhat disquieting pictures of abandoned malls, and that's a sort of another fascination that vaporwave has, is the idea of the liminal space, something that is familiar but is uncomfortable. Like often with malls, we're used to seeing them filled with people, and seeing them empty and abandoned can have a sort of a disquieting effect. And another interesting part about it is the fact that all of the releases are labeled as being in 1992. Although if you go through, you could probably see that they were all released back in 2019, I think it was. And it went very largely unnoticed until the vaporwave label Geometric Lullaby noticed them and put out a tape version of their works. But they put it out in two albums, like the Pink Album and the Blue Album, because on the Bandcamp space itself, it's just a collection of EPs, basically, with some of them being a collection of blue tinted album covers, the other ones being blue. So that was it's a very interesting project as a whole, both the way that the Bandcamp is designed itself, as well as the music itself, which interestingly, like the very first album is much more reverby and degraded, and of course it sounds like a degraded mall music, than the rest of it. It's almost like it's like it starts at the end of the world, but is gradually going back to a more normal state, because the final EP is the least degraded sounding. So that's to feel depressed, to be in low spirits.bandcamp.com, with the proper name just being the Chinese character for depression. If you're interested in vaporwave, I think that's something that you would enjoy.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in vaporwave. I love it.
Yeah, and this one I think is interesting, both musically and as a project, visual project. I think it brings those together in a way that really works. The other one is an older one that I wanted to discuss. It's this one, you may have heard of this because it went viral a couple of years back, but then it kind of fell off quickly, which I think is a shame, because it's actually pretty good stuff. It's Disaster Radio. It's Disaster Radio, being one word with one R, .bandcamp.com. It's a project from New Zealand, which does this sort of quirky, like, synth pop. One of the songs off the album, Charisma, had gone viral a couple years back with its goofy music video. It was called Gravy Rainbow. Both the video and the song are pretty fun, but it's kind of a standout in that it's sort of like self-consciously being this this like silly twee synth pop song, whereas the rest of Charisma had this sort of like apocalypse and kind of theme to it. Songs like Drop the Bomb, Computer Whiz, No Pulse, Virtual Sunrise. Yeah, it's a mixture of instrumentals and tracks with singing. His voice is usually very heavily modulated. So I think that's a very solid album. He recently released a new one called Sweatshop, which continues in that same vein, mix of instrumentals and singing and songs with singing over it. And this one has a sort of space theme to it. The music video, which was not as memorable as the Gravy Rainbow one, but the song "Oh Yeah" is just a 3D animation of the guy dancing in a spacesuit. Sweatshop, that's a pretty good album. He also has this project is actually pretty old. It goes back to see when the oldest one was from. Yeah, it goes back to like 2001 when which was like a sort of DIY electronic music. And you can kind of hear the evolution as you go through it from a sort of like rough DIY electronic music to the to the more polished sounding things like Charisma and Sweatshop. So that's disasterradio.bandcamp.com. I think that's a pretty solid project and worth checking out.
Zach, would you be interested in perhaps on our next podcast reading a portion of your unpublished work?
The thing is, I don't really have much unpublished work.
I mean, the one that you're planning to publish.
Oh, Dinosaurs and Potted Plants. Yeah, I could definitely do that. I'm hoping it will come out completely normally, but there are some people who are writers who've been published by Nihilism Revised, and for whatever reason, which I mean I can understand, they seriously hate me because I've been very vocal about Christianity and somewhat right-wing politics and other things. I troll their hero, Brian Keene, who I can't stand and who a lot of people can't stand. And that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, given like all the shenanigans I've been in. And so they're all like, pull his book or we're pulling our books and that type of thing. So I'm figuring out how to resolve that.
How do you reconcile your Christianity with your interest in writing horror?
Well, I don't really write horror anymore. That definitely stopped after conversion. But before that, I hadn't really been a horror writer. Like I'd had some horror stuff published, but the majority of what I wrote would be considered literary, probably.
The one thing I've kind of learned in life is that I think trolling starts when with a lot of these people with their weird deals, like you're talking about those other writers that you troll. That I found it's just. I don't regret my trolling, but I regret the time I wasted doing it.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that, definitely. Brian Keene is a lost cause.
Well, they're all lost causes, and the question is, how long is, I'm more concerned about leaving a legacy than I am about somebody else's work, primarily.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only reason I troll Keene was because him and then the people who pump him up have a thing where they want to really, they want to blackball writers, and they're very into like public shaming.
Yeah, and that's totally normal because that's human nature. But there's nothing. I don't believe trolling is an effective way of stopping that. Let me put it that way.
It's not.
But I definitely do feel like this whole deal, especially among literary people, has gotten out of control. But that's neither here nor there,
I finally found what I was looking for. It's It's a label called, it's just called Tourist, but the Bandcamp URL is stlabel.bandcamp.com. I found this when I was looking for just some ambient music to listen to. The first thing I saw was something called by J.P. Michael's Motifs for a Toy Piano, which was just what it sounds like. It's these sort of short, sort of neoclassical pieces done on a sort of toy piano, and they're quite pleasant to listen to. But it turns out that J.P. Michaels is kind of a side project of the main musician, which is Dravier, which again is a ambient project. And I don't have too much to say about this one because other than it's pretty nice ambient work, and I think it's worth listening to. It's good for background music while while I'm reading, or it might be good for background music while you're writing.
I'm glad you said that about the piano, because that made me remember a band I wanted to talk about, but it slipped my mind. They're an older band, but this particular album, since it was put out through Ipecac, which is Mike Patton's label, and it hasn't come back in print, except they're like a super pricey vinyl edition. The band Mini Mansions, they have a lot of really toyish sounding piano type things. It's kind of like actually, in a way, run like it. They're a standard. I wouldn't say a standard rock band, but if you can imagine a really weird rock band with this kind of creepy sounding piano thing is like replacing the guitar, it's pretty much what they are, and it's a pretty mind-blowing album. I think the album is self-titled Mini Mansions, but it's definitely worth checking out.
Oh yeah, you did show me this album. I did listen to a couple songs from this. Maybe it was just the ones I listened to, but they sounded very very Beatle-esque, very British Invasion sort of rockish.
Yeah, it definitely had that vibe to it, but with like a really weird slant, which you kind of expect with anything Mike Patton's even peripherally involved in.
Yeah, definitely. And that album is at Mini Mansions. How do you pronounce that record label name again?
I think it's just Ipecac.
Yeah, so it's Mini Mansions, Ipecac, one word, .bandcamp.com. And finally, the last one I wanted to discuss was a James Ferraro album. There's a James Ferraro, or actually J. James Ferraro .bandcamp.com. James Ferraro is most famous for his work. What was that called? Far Side Virtual. That's what it was called, and that was a sort of nascent vaporwave album, which was composed almost entirely of like MIDI sounds. Like if you listen, you could hear stuff like Skype noises, Windows startup noises, things like that throughout it. Though he did somewhat move on from that relatively quickly, because James Ferraro has been around since like 2000, and he's been all over the map with his compositions. The one I wanted to discuss was Neurogeist, which is his newest release. The Bandcamp description for it just says cybernetic humanism, and it kind of sounds that way. It's almost some of the pieces sound almost like Philip Glass, and all of them have a very very tightly composed kind of minimalist sound to them. Apparently, this is his sequel to another project he did called Four Pieces for Mirai, which was another sort of neoclassical kind of composition. Like the description for that one actually gives like a short story about cities dying and the end of the world, things like that. With Mirai being a computer virus that is actually benevolent. It's sort of his Because James Ferraro is very, even though he uses a lot of technology, you get the feeling that he's very skeptical of what technology can do. He has a lot of satire about the use of modern technology, a lot of satire about modern consumerism, things like that. And these sort of neoclassical pieces are sort of compositions looking at that. And
what was it called? Cybernetic something?
Well, the name of the album is Neurogeist. The description of it in Bandcamp is just cybernetic humanism. Yeah, and like if you look on his Bandcamp page, he has stuff like Human Story 3, which has this like cheesy picture of a guy with an Amazon box on his head, and that one is sort of that one is more in line with a Far Side Virtual, except it's less pop sounding and more classical, neoclassical sounding. It has titles like Market Phagia, Market Collapse, Security Broker, Plastic Ocean, things like that. There's one called Burning Prius, which gives you a good idea of the kind of vibe he's going for. So yeah, James Ferraro and his newer direction. For those not familiar with him, he sort of started off as ambient music. He moved toward the vaporwave sound. Then he had a sort of period where he was doing this weird dark R&B music, and now he's sort of just doing this computer generated neoclassical music. It almost sounds like a Philip Glass and a modern Stockhausen, but I do think it's definitely interesting stuff. It's worth it's worth listening to. It's worth, I think it's worth not even just as background music. It's worth sitting down and like listening closely what he does with these electronic sounds.
So when you say computer generated, you don't mean it's like some kind of her type thing with like the algorithm helping him like compose it. It's just he's using that like the digital technology to compose, right?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, he's not done anything where he's composed it with an algorithm. I'm not sure if this was him or if it was another artist who actually did use created a sort of opera with Vocaloid, with the Vocaloid program. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's like a Japanese voice generation program. So it's designed to adapt songs and things like that. So it definitely still sounds like computer generated voices, but someone actually took that and composed an opera around it, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But I'll have to actually look up who that is, because I don't think that was James Ferraro, but it's a similar idea.
Yeah, I'm not interested if it kind of goes as far as where like an algorithm or an AI can actually like produce a song, which you've seen her, right?
I haven't actually seen her, no.
Oh. Well, it happens in that movie, and it's like it's something I can't really see myself listening to. Like I don't even know if I would consider something like completely like even conceived by a computer as art. Like I don't think I could cross that line.
Yeah, James Ferraro, he's definitely composing here, but there is a sort of, there's actually a sort of skepticism and sometimes even outright fear about what technology will be used for. Like Far Side Virtual that I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like very sarcastic like Microsoft voice generations, talking about luxury and things like that. And it ends up being like very disquieting if you listen to the album closely.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, I definitely recommend like pretty much all of James Ferraro's oeuvre. He's a very fascinating figure.
So how big are you into vaporwave? Like, I know it's definitely not a new thing. Like, it started a couple years ago. Like, I don't know when, but like, were you into it kind of from the outset, or did you kind of get into it later, like I did?
I can't remember when I discovered it. Like most people, I discovered it when I listened to Macintosh Plus's what was that? What was that album called? Floor Shop. That's what it's called. That was the first one I discovered, and I really enjoyed that one. So I just kind of, started exploring it on Bandcamp and Rate Your Music and things like that. And I'd say I'm pretty big into it. I tend to prefer the more ambient sounding stuff, but there are some really cool stuff that does sound more like it's actually intentionally almost trying to sound like what you would hear if we were on hold with customer service. Some of the compositions that go for that vibe actually are pretty cool sounding.
Do you ever get into vaporwave, Paul?
No, I can't. I have to plead complete ignorance of the whole matter.
I do know that in one of your stories in Down Where the Devil Don't Go, you have a character who's a parody of Taylor Swift back when she was still a country singer.
Well, the whole song, that was actually, that wasn't Taylor Swift, but it was a parody of female blonde country singers, and it was to be a parody of the music industry and about how much I hated music on the radio in general.
Yeah, like the character of that, the main character of that story, his name is like John Wayne Cash Brazil or something like that. Something a little over the top.
Well, there was actually a guy. Yeah, the whole story was to be a parody of the music industry, but honestly, I don't know much about electronic music of any kind.
Yeah, what do you mostly listen to?
I don't listen to a lot of music. The music I post on Facebook is music I feel like should be promoted, or I feel like it has energy. But I seriously don't have time to listen to most of the stuff I even post. I just prefer energetic music of, whatever genre. But it's I feel like most music, we were talking about indie rock earlier, and I feel like most music today lacks energy. Like Billie Eilish was not connected to either genre, but she is the darling of the Zoomer, I guess, whatever. But she just seems like she has no energy, like she's drained of vitality, like she has no physical presence at all.
Yeah, I definitely get that with a lot of new music.
And so I understand the appeal to the mind of vaporware music, taking your mind somewhere else from the contemporary problems and contemporary music, and perhaps acting as a palliative. But like I said, I've listened to some in the past, but it's been too long ago where I could not talk intelligently about it. I'm not opposed to it in any way. I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah, the vaporwave scene is kind of interesting in that it's mostly apolitical, but a lot of it has a sort of leftist underpinning, especially people like James Ferraro, where they're very hypercritical of consumerism.
It's kind of weird that you say that, because I always thought that it was like a super alt-right type thing, because I've said that in the past. I'm like, when is this is kind of getting into wonky territory, but you look at the people like the guy who sacrificed the goat. I can't remember his name, but he was straight up.
Invictus.
Yeah, it seems like with people who are heavily into the occult, they're always super.
Okay, I'll explain that to you. Autism. It appeals to people with autism. And I'm not just saying that as to insult vaporware, but it appears to invoke some kind of feeling in people who are on the spectrum. And I would suppose that's a good thing, but nonetheless, I think that's the primary appeal to people on the, what we might call, what used to be the alternative right.
Yeah, the thing is, like, in general, it definitely appeals to people who are what you would call very online, which I guess might be a corollary of autism. But I guess like the appeal to alt-right or extreme right types probably comes from one, a lot of them are not really pro-consumerist and probably do like that message in in the music. But as far as the appeal in general to it, I really don't know if they have any like political reason to like it. Like I said, I think it's probably just a symptom of being very online and spending a lot of time on the internet.
I don't see how you could politicize it. I'm sure there are variations of the music that somehow impact various areas of the brain, but overall, it doesn't seem all that political.
Yeah, I think I think it's a way like a really simple answer. I think it's just like it's kind of an awesome aesthetic that maybe people of my generation specifically can relate to because we grew up with computers and stuff being old and not really used that much like when we were kids. But we were introduced to digital technology and stuff as kids in school, and a lot of that stuff had that kind of like futuristic retro vibe. And then you kind of get into today where everything's kind of perfect, but it's as far as like presentation goes, but a lot of it's lost its I don't know pizzazz, and it's like the vaporwave takes that cool retro futurism that we always envisioned when looking at the internet and imagining what it could be, and kind of inorganically puts it back in there so everyone can kind of get on board with it, and then they take that and just like slap it onto some kind of political movement, and it automatically makes it hip, if that makes sense.
I think that was certainly the appeal to the alt-right. I think primarily the apolitical is perhaps the most political because it's condescending and refusing to accept the contemporary wings on the monster as serious politics, or the ideological wings. So it's kind of has a transcendent quality to it, you might say. Just being against stuff like consumerism, it's hard to say it's a left-right issue, but it's definitely an apolitical issue since both sides are in favor of consumerism.
Yeah. I think then also
rising above it and taking an apolitical stance is
in general, it could kind of be seen as a almost a criticism of the neoliberal idea, the end of history, because a lot of it is looking back on that era in the 80s and 90s where they talked about how like this is like the peak of human civilization, this is the end of history, everything is going to be as good as this now, this is as good as it's ever going to be, and that wasn't fucking the case. And so it's almost like looking back on that as a sort of broken promise by taking the sort of corporate and utilitarian music of that time and chopping it and screwing it and drowning it in reverb.
Yeah, then also there's another thing real similar to that I've noticed is the modern kind of leftist thing to not really destroy history, but to label a lot of things as like, all these classics came from old white men and we're better than that now. Well, a lot of, which I don't subscribe to that viewpoint, but a lot of vaporwave art I've seen kind of takes old statues of these like Greek philosophers or philosophers from other eras who have that kind of stuffy I don't know another word other than whiteness, kind of stuffy whiteness about them. Again, not that that's a bad thing, but it kind of takes that and puts it in with this retro futuristic aesthetic, and it's almost like saying, yeah, this this old philosophy is really freaking cool. And I guess it's like making the old hip again, but with retro futurism, which, to be honest, it's really weird that like being into this whole retro futurism thing is so strange because it's almost like you're admitting that a part of your brain didn't exist in the real world. And I think people of older generations really can't get it. But literally like the people in my age group who were really into it, it's really strange because we have nostalgia for something that really never existed. It was just internet graphics of that time that kind of ignited your imagination in the, this is what the future is going to be type way. And
there's a Welsh word for that. It's something like Hirath or something like that. And there's actually one vaporwave record label that's named that. And that word is, the translation for that is a nostalgia for a time that never existed.
That's pretty cool.
I think vaporwave, and this may be my problem getting interested in it, is it's pretty implicitly white. And that may explain my disinterest in it. It's not that I'm opposed to it, or it's just that I can't get into it. And I
would say it's being co-opted by that, like the alt-right type thing. I really don't think it's implicitly white. Like it is once you get into the stuff like, having the bust of old statues.
Its fan base is implicitly white autists.
I mean, that's definitely true. The fan base. James Ferraro. I'm not sure what his race is, but he definitely looks like he's either a light-skinned black guy or he's mixed race.
Yeah, and I think we had a dude on. Was it Mike Klein who was sometimes a vaporwave artist under a pseudonym on Bandcamp?
Yeah, he. I don't think he ever revealed it. He does make electronic music, but I think he said he didn't want to name who he makes vaporwave music under because anonymity is a big part of it. But yeah, he's an African immigrant, so he's another one.
Yeah, so I really think it's about that generational thing. Like there are definitely, it has been used, and that's a big part of the fan base is the white alt-righters. But I really do think it's about that your generation of kids who were like exposed to that type of aesthetic, and it's like kind of. I think the best way comparison is if you see older people get on Facebook these days. They'll share memes, and those memes always have some kind of old cartoon or just like an old look to it. I think people usually call them the boomer memes. Like it'll be a meme of Bugs Bunny standing there being all condescending looking, saying something about kids these days. And you see that a ton. I think that's kind of like my generation's our version of boomer memes.
Well, prior to Facebook and all that, a lot of those same boomers, they were the smarter boomers, but there was stuff going on websites like Free Republic and so on back in the day where a lot of stuff was based on nostalgia for the TV shows and social mores and whatever music and comics and comic books and so on were hip at that time. So it was the same situation basically. It just was more intelligible back in the day because people were a little bit more eloquent or a little bit more well-spoken on the internet in 1998 than they are today because the internet wasn't available to riffraff.
You actually had to type shit at that time. You couldn't just post a stupid meme with a picture from a Full Metal Jacket or something.
Yeah, it's actually I don't want to talk about my books because this isn't like a book podcast, but dinosaurs and potted plants, a big theme of that, and actually not I'm not promoting this, I'm just exploring it and kind of calling it a bad thing, is nostalgia for media, which kind of leads to the worship of media. Like one of the characters, and he would actually be kind of I wouldn't say he's autistic in the book, but he definitely has those kind of anti-social type qualities. The character Berkshire, if you remember, Ben, who is really into media nostalgia to the point where he turns it into his own freaking crazy harebrained religion where he goes back and takes media that hasn't been corrupted by the quote unquote liberal elites and takes spiritual messages from it, which I guess in a way is kind of a parody of everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, and besides the fact that he's got that ridiculous religion, he's comes across as very pretentious and very like almost like a stereotypical neckbeard.
Yeah,
Who are some of your primary influences as a writer, Zach?
That's really tough. I got initially it would have just been horror writers, but it's definitely since grown to many literary writers. I would say my favorite writer of all time, probably William Faulkner. Definitely the usual suspects like Faulkner, Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Thomas Mann wrote my favorite novel of all time, which is The Magic Mountain. But then I also like, I like new stuff too. Just too many to think about. I'm kind of blanking on names, but I've read a lot of like bizarro type things and political things in the nature of like Jim Goad. He's definitely a big one.
I liked Mann's book, Dr. Faustus. I don't know if you've read it.
Nah, I've not read that one yet.
Recommend that one.
I've read Death in Venice. I think that's a really good one, even if the subject matter is somewhat uncomfortable. So I think we're almost at the hour and 15-minute mark, so I'm going to try to wrap this up soon. Is there anything either of you have to say before we wrap up?
Well, I enjoyed being on with you gentlemen this evening. I'm looking forward to reading your book, Zach, which I just got on my Kindle. I'm hoping that we can have you back on and possibly some other guests in the near future. I'm looking forward to talking to a variety of guests and maybe reading a sample of your work and Ben's work on air in the near future.
That'd definitely be cool. I need to pick up your books too. I've been meaning to ever since we had you on that Quiet Place episode. Who was it you were published by again? Was it Nine Banded Books or Underworld Amusement?
Chip has one of my books out on Nine Banded, and the other is out on Ann Sturzinger's defunct label. But
she had a label?
Not a label. What is it called? A press.
Yeah, I didn't know she had one.
She had one for a minute, and those are both available on Amazon, and so yeah, support Chip and Ann and buy my book.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I didn't know Ann had one. She's kind of been, I guess you would say, unofficial new co-host of The Quiet Place. Not necessarily, I mean, she's been on a ton of the shows ever since Gregor left The Quiet Place.
Okay, I'm going to have to start listening then because that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I never knew she had. I'll have to look up that. What was it called? Her publisher?
You'll have to ask her.
Black House Rocked. Or do you mean the imprint?
Yeah, the imprint. And the book, too. You said Black House Rocked?
Yeah, the imprint was called Hopeless Books, I think. I think she technically still has it, but she still just puts her own work out under it, and she calls it Laughing Gallows now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you buy the book, the money will go to her, so that's cool. She needs the money more than I do. So support Ann Sturzinger and buy my book.
That's a good pitch. Definitely.
Okay. And like I mentioned before, my new book, Dr. Sodom and Mrs. Gomorrah, is out now on Amazon, available through Kindle and paperback. You can visit Zach's blog at indierockdinosaur.wordpress.com to keep up with him on there. And is there a place people can follow you to keep up with you, Paul?
No. I mean, probably this podcast, maybe.
Do you have Facebook or anything?
I basically use Facebook for business anymore. I've gotten, what was it? Was it Rimbaud or that other French poet that gave up poetry and went to gun running because he was basically starving. That's what I basically had to do.
Yeah,
so, in other words, yeah, that's kind of my deal.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. This has been Bandcamp Massacre with Ben Arzate, Paul Bingham, and our guest, Zakary McGaha. This has been the pilot episode, and hopefully this sounds okay when it's up, and hopefully I'll get better at this with future episodes. Thanks a lot, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you all later.
Sayonara.